Alright, what is going on guys? Hope you're having a great day. So I wanted to kickstart this video by letting you all know that lean bulking is absolutely possible. Even though it sounds like a bit of a contradiction, right? To stay lean whilst you bulk up, it's 100% possible. And in fact, in today's video, I'm going to take you through the past 4 to 5 years, everything that I've learned in terms of the failures I made, the mistakes, everything I learned to do, everything I learned to not do. That is what I'm going to take you through today. So essentially, we're going to break it down into 5 very useful steps that you can incorporate in your own training and diet to make sure you can stay lean while bulking, aka lean bulk. This is going to be a great video guys, because honestly, if I knew the things I'm going to share with you today, I would have saved a whole bunch of time when I first started out. Because when I started out guys, I approached things in a terrible way. So when I first began trying to change my body in terms of going to the gym, putting on muscle mass, all that kind of stuff, getting aesthetic, the major pitfall that I made was thinking that you needed to eat everything under the sun in order to make progress, and that just couldn't be further from the truth. So when I first started out, what I started doing guys is just eating everything. I would just decide that, you know, I'll go on the seafood diet, I'm gonna see food, I'm gonna eat it, because that's how you make results. And a lot of people are under that assumption that whatever you eat is just gonna turn into muscle mass as long as you're training hard, and that just couldn't be further from the truth. So the biggest mistake that I made, and the first tip that I could give you guys, is to not put on weight too quickly. In fact, the rule of thumb guys for you to want to aim for in terms of weight gain is to put on about 1/2 pound to 1 pound of body weight per week. Now that is a fast rate of weight gain. Trust me guys, you're not going to be putting on 1/2 pound of muscle to 1 pound of muscle the entire time, because that's just not really possible in terms of your genetic limit. Now obviously you're on steroids, it's a whole different story, but for the most part guys, you're not going to be able to put on over a pound of muscle per week unless you're an absolute newbie. So for beginners, what I recommend is you aiming to put on 1 pound per week of body weight, because you have that potential to store that amount of muscle mass. But the further along you get in your training, the less and less weight you're going to want to put on, and you want to get down to a point where you're putting on maybe a pound a month, because that is really what your potential is going to become. Because there's a rate of diminishing returns guys, that the more you train, the less likely you are to be able to put on muscle mass. So that would have saved me so much time, because frankly my first bulk was just futile, because once I put on all that extra weight, I put on way too much weight than I should have. I gained maybe, you know, I can't remember exactly, but I think I put on about 20 to 30 pounds in about 2 months. That's a lot of freaking weight. That's a ton of weight, man. That's at least 2 to 3 pounds a week. That's way too much weight. And as such, probably 20 pounds of that was fat. I had to lose that, and then by the time I'd lost all of that, I'd lost all my muscle in the process, because it took so long and I did a pretty aggressive calorie deficit. So that was the biggest mistake guys. Now the next biggest mistake that I made was eating way too much bad food. Now alongside the seafood diet that I went for, I also went for the fucking eat anything diet. I would eat peanut butter jelly sandwiches, I'd eat you know, tons of Cocoa Pops, I'd eat burgers, I'd eat this. I just thought that I'm bulking, I might as well. And that's usually the philosophy that a lot of people take on. They say, well, I'm just bulking, you know, when I cut down, I'll be healthy. And that's a terrible mindset to have, because when you're bulking, that's probably the most important bit, is putting on that muscle mass. And you can't do that if you're fueling your body with absolute junk. So instead of, you know, just eating everything under the sun, going for the burgers, the pizzas, the KFC, the chocolate bars, all that kind of stuff, what you're gonna wanna do guys is incorporate a 90-10 deal, okay? And that means that 90% of the time you're gonna be eating healthy foods, 10% of the time you're gonna be having those flexible, you know, unhealthy foods, if you want to call them that. You know, you go out for that meal, you go out for that pizza, you go out for that, and that doesn't mean that you can't incorporate more flexibility, because you can still eat out within that 90% of the time. But when you do go out to eat, make sure you're choosing, you know, healthy salads, or make sure you're choosing the lean protein or the steak with the veg instead of the pizzas and the burgers. That stuff falls under the 10% of the time. The rest of the time, you can go out to eat, just make sure it's reasonable what you're eating. So those 2 steps, guys, are all going to apply to your nutrition, which is probably the most important thing when it comes to lean bulking. The tips from here on out are really going to apply to your training and everything else in between. So when I started out, guys, when I first started training, you know, I think a lot of people can get like this. A lot of people do this. They either go way too hard and then they quit, or they go way too hard and then they just keep on going harder and harder and harder. And both of those situations are shocking, okay? So when you first start out, you really don't want to go too hard, because the thing to understand is you can make a lot of progress just on a little bit of stimulation when you first work out. Okay, you can go in, you can do a bicep curl, and you probably put on a bit of muscle mass in your biceps. Whereas right now, if I did that, it wouldn't be enough to stimulate growth. But for you starting out, you don't want to overdo it, because that just leads to overtraining. And the idea of putting on muscle mass is not to make as much progress as you can in a short amount of time, but instead to ensure that you don't overtrain, you don't burn out, you make as much progress over a long period of time instead of just trying to do it in 1 to 2 weeks. So the biggest mistake that I did was to overtrain, okay? I overtrained so much. In fact, I was training twice daily, guys. I was training twice daily. It wasn't just a little bit, it was going in, it was beating the absolute F out of my muscles, working out till the point where because I felt like I had to do that. I really felt like I had to do that to make progress. I had to kill myself. By the end of the workout, if I wasn't drenched in sweat, if I wasn't just completely gassed, I didn't feel like I was doing enough. So that's a bad mindset to get into. And I think a lot of these motivational videos can get you into that kind of mindset, thinking that, well, if you don't push yourself, if you don't go the extra mile, if you don't do that extra rep, if you don't do that extra set, then you're not gonna make progress. And that couldn't be further from the truth. The better thing to do, guys, is to find a good program and stick to that wholeheartedly, because if I had just done that for the first 1 to 2 years of my training, I would have made so much progress instead of killing myself in the gym and not getting as much reward as I should have with all the work that I was doing. So the next thing that I really wish I did more of is to track my weight and track my progress, because if you don't track exactly what kind of path you are on, you don't really know if you're making the right amount of progress that you want, or if you're actually progressing in the way that you want. Maybe you're going backwards. Maybe you're not really improving as much as you thought. And you'll never know that unless you take photos, unless you track your weight, unless you measure. You're just not gonna know. And that's something that I really wish I did more. Looking back on where I was and to where I am right now, if I could compare those two photos more accurately, if I took more photos back then, I'd have a better comparison. And it would just be a cooler process in general to look back, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years into the future of yourself being where you will be. Looking back, it's fantastic. It's a great experience. So having those photos to look back on when you don't have that motivation to push on is a really great idea. So please, guys, learn from me, take more photos, track your weight, make sure you're only putting on half a pound to a pound per week. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can get a tape measure and measure your muscles and see if that's progressing that way as well. The fifth and final step, guys, that I wish I did more of was to just bulk cook my foods, man. Honestly, what I used to do when I first started out, I was very strict with my meals, but I'd cook all the meals up in a huge quantity amount. So I'd cook maybe 3 to 4 days of meals in advance. So I would have it all in tiny little Tupperware containers, and the Tupperware containers were just stinky. They'd get gross, especially by the 4th day. I'd want to freaking kill myself because the food was so soggy, so gross, but I felt I had to do it because you know what, you gotta be a hardcore mother effer, but that's just not the case, guys. And something that I'd recommend instead of doing that is to cook your foods in bulk, but then store them separately instead of cooking them all and then making the meals up individually. So that was the biggest mistake I made, was thinking that you needed to prep these meals all in advance to make progress, and that's not necessarily true. The alternative is to find bigger Tupperware containers and then store the bulk cooked foods individually, right? So say you cook up a bunch of chicken breasts, you're gonna store that in one big container. You cook up a bunch of sweet potato, you're gonna store that in one big container. Rice, you're gonna have that in a big container, and then instead of making all your meals at once, the night before you go to work or school, what you're gonna do is make the meals that you will for that day, and as such, they're fresher, they taste better, and you're just more likely to stick to the diet overall. Yeah, so anyway, guys, that is gonna wrap up the 5 major failures and pitfalls that I made, as well as the tips to make lean bulking easier. So essentially, if you just take those things, guys, and make sure you tick the boxes and all of those, then you will be sure to make progress. Because if you're just focusing on nailing down a very solid program, you're hitting that to the dot, you're not taking it too intense, you're not overtraining yourself, you're eating the right amount of foods, you're eating the right amount of healthy foods, incorporating that flexibility to ensure that you can stay on track, I guarantee you that 10 weeks, 20 weeks, 6 months, a year down the track, you'll make so much progress and you won't need to cut That's the best thing about lean bulking. You're not going to need to shred down that fat because there's no need to. You're still lean. It's great. It's flipping phenomenal, guys. So anyway, that is going to be the wrap up. 5 quick tips that you can incorporate. If you enjoyed this video, comment down below whatever your favorite tip was or anything at all, guys. Drop a like on this video. It helps it out tons. And then that will make sure I make more of these videos, guys. So with that, I'll catch you in the next video.